Let me read a bit of this. It says, what is code switching? Understanding the impact of code switching for racial ethnic minorities. What exactly is code switching? This is Kayan O'Connor, PhD. I don't know what the psychology today is what it's from. It says, what exactly is code switching? Many of us may do it and not even realize it. Others may have never heard this term before. Some others may not acknowledge it as a real thing. Usually, groups in the latter category don't acknowledge it because they never had to engage in it. The privilege of being able to ignore the strategies others must engage in just to be allowed entry into common spaces is something that many take for granted. My goal in this article is to talk about what code switching is, how it affects the Black, Indigenous, and people of color community, and my views about how to move forward from here. The definition of code switching has not been static and has changed over time, along with many other social constructs. In this article, I focus on cultural code switching that involves the suppression of multiple aspects of one's cultural identity, which can include type of clothing worn, hairstyle, speech, or behavior. In the broadest sense, code switching involves adapting the presentation of oneself in ways that disconnect them from the cultural or racial stereotypes of their group. The goal being to enhance the comfort of others, typically those outside of their cultural or racial group, in hopes of receiving equal treatment and opportunities for advancement. Code switching is a strategy used by individuals who identify as BIPOC, who often find it necessary to effectively navigate professional settings. I don't like that acronym, but whatever. There are multiple examples of code switching. For example, when a person considers each morning before getting dressed for work or school whether their traditional cultural garments will be viewed as acceptable, whether wearing a turban, hijab, or bindi will be off-putting to their colleagues or supervisors, or whether their natural hair, afro, dreadlocks, braids, etc., will be seen as unprofessional. Code switching also involves adapting with aspects of themselves that may not be as easily identified. In academic and professional settings, many in the acronym community are likely familiar with the term Oreo. And no, I'm not talking about the cookie, but what the cookie represents, black on the outside and white on the inside, the use of a white voice, and other Western Eurocentric ways of speaking, being, and engaging to fit in with non-Hispanic white society. Acronym community members are more likely than their non-Hispanic white counterparts to say they feel the need to code switch. In a study conducted in the Pew Pew Research Center 2019, they found that overall 4 in 10 Black and Hispanic adults often feel the need to change the way they talk around others of different races and ethnicities, especially among non-Hispanic whites. Interestingly, the group most affected are Black college graduates under the age of 50, where 53% of the group report feeling the need to switch how they express themselves when they are among people of different racial and ethnic backgrounds. Unfortunately, we don't have recent data on the acronyms groups, but research suggests we would see similar findings. Excuse me. Further code switching is likely significantly underreported. Why? Because admitting to code switching can sometimes create tension between an individual and members of the cultural group with they most strongly identify. And second, many of us begin code switching unconsciously without thinking about it, without realizing it's happening. According to a Harvard Business Review 2019, code switching most often occurs in environments where negative stereotypes about acronym individuals don't align with what is considered normative or appropriate for that environment. This is most commonly in academia and in places of employment. Many have argued code switching is one of the key dilemmas that acronym employees face. I am sure we can all agree that the workplace setting requires some degree of code switching for everyone, including non acronym employees. All of us likely have had to switch some aspects of our personalities, tone of voice, and clothing choices between the home and the office, depending on workplace culture and expectations. Some might even say that this phenomenon is really about being professional and has nothing to do with race. Let's ponder this point for a moment. Who decides what is professional and what is unprofessional? Who decides whether an afro or dreadlocks are unacceptable for certain environments? Where do we get messages that cultural or traditional clothing is improper and potentially offensive? I suggest that what we as a society consider to be acceptable and professional in academia and places of employment is largely based upon the standards set by the non Hispanic white majority. Thus, the conversation about code switching cannot occur without our recognition of the role that systemic racism, or the racism that is embedded as normal practice within society or an organization that inherently marginalize people of color, plays in this phenomenon. Often it is the majority non-Hispanic white cultures that sets the standard by which all others are judged. Many don't recognize this as a serious concern that should be addressed and discussed. If acronym employees did not feel they would be discriminated against, treated differently, viewed as inferior or less intelligent by their colleagues due to behaving, dressing, and speaking in a manner that aligned with their cultural identity, there would be no compelling reason to engage in code switching, and we would not have to be having this conversation. Some may say that it sounds like code switching is a strategy for success, and perhaps the act of code switching in and of itself is not necessarily bad. However, when people feel forced to code switch in order to prosper in academic or work environments, it can have negative consequences. Downplaying one's membership in their racial, ethnic, or cultural group can lead to tensions within group members, leading to negative interactions with peers being called white or an Oreo, or claims that the people who you really care about don't know who you really are. Consciously avoiding race based stereotypes is hard work, and needing to maintain that attentiveness at all times can be emotionally taxing. I am optimistic that one day we will live in a world where being one's authentic self in organizational environments does not come at the potential cost of success and upward mobility. There are strategies organizations can take to begin reducing the need for code switching and the negative consequences acronym employees face as a result. So then she goes into a list of things that do. It says organizational assessment, diversity and inclusion. Leaders can set the standard. The acronym employees be strategic. Data, 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 data. The reason why I wanted to cover this is because I want people to understand that this kind of thing is a real thing and it really does affect people. Um, and a lot of people don't believe that it is. And that's where it comes in, where people talk about, it's like, when I've been unplugging, so I haven't been watching very much news and stuff. But I saw something where it was like, racially motivated fight or something, and it's all catching the news, and they're like, oh, they call this person a N-word or something like that, and all of this and all of that. And then it's like, they really make a big deal out of that or whatever. And I'm like, okay, whatever. But when I think about racism, I think about systemic racism, okay? Um, this is the thing where people say, I don't see color, they say racism is over or that it doesn't exist or whatever. And then what I point to is things like this one right here, where you have groups of people who have to code switch so that they can feel like they have an opportunity, okay? So that they can feel like they can move forward. Where people have to, it's systemic. Okay, it's systemic racism. Okay, that is real and that is actually harmful. Okay, when they say that everybody has equal opportunity, that is not true. It's just simply not true. You know, you have a system already set up for certain groups of people to, you know, get an easier ride, if you will, because their natural culture or their culture that they have been embedded in is the, let's say, dominant one. Therefore, you know, they don't have to code switch. They don't have to give their kids names that they wouldn't normally. You know, they don't have to dress different. They don't have to do their hair in a different way. You know, they don't have to speak in a different way. You know, they don't have to fake. You know, they can't be themselves. Okay. So if they're in a situation where they can't be themselves, then there goes the systemic racism that's going on. The, you know, pushing certain groups to the periphery, if you will. It's like, and if you want to be not outcasted, if you want to be within, then you have to conform. Is that what they like to say? Um, you have to conform to the dominant culture, if you will. Or, and they're like, oh, they won't conform, so then you have to push them out. So then who's the ones who gets to decide this? Who gets to decide what is acceptable and what's not? So then, like, okay, depending on the country, then it's like, okay, then you have to be Christian. So, and if you're not Christian, then you're not conforming. So you're pushed to the periphery. Or you have to be Muslim. You're not Muslim, then you're pushed to the periphery. Or you have to be Hindu. And if you're not Hindu, then you're pushed to the periphery. Okay? And then, or Jewish or whatever. And then, how many of these people are dressing up in these costumes, is what I call it, and pretending just so that they can go along to get along, just so they can get by? How many people wear the Hanukkah just so that they can walk the streets and not be bothered, and they don't care one way or the other? They're probably secular. A lot of these people are. And they, say, okay, yeah, whatever the greetings are, alhamdulillah, or assalamu alaikum, or, God is good all the time, Jesus saves, or um, shalom. You know, they say these things, and they maybe wear a costume, and that helps them get by. But when they go home at the end of the day, they're not reading the Quran, or they're not reading the Bible, or they don't go to church, or the Sabbath. They don't really worship. You know, I'm doing this because I want us to, like, I study anthropology, and I've been compelled to go down this road, and I compare different cultures. And because I do that, I can see the inconsistencies, I can see the flaws, I can see where we are pretending, you know. And I'm looking for, I feel it in the air, it's the year of seven, global revolution, you know, um, where people hopefully at some point can get to the point where they don't scrutinize somebody, because they have a different religion, or they have a different skin tone, or they have a different gender, or they have a different um, sexual attraction or whatever. Like, I mean, the idea of who is irredeemable. So once you decide that a certain group is irredeemable, then this gives the excuse for eradication. This gives the excuse for sterilization. This gives the excuse for locking them up, putting them in prison, or shipping them away or not allowing them into your country, stopping them at the border, allowing them to drown off on a boat because they're trying to come in and you don't want them here, mass shootings, mass stabbings, bombings, war, that's where this is coming from. Okay. It's intolerance, which is cool, but it's not just language.